Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you happen to be watching this. My name's Ruth Anne, and I'm delighted to be sharing in our teaching time this morning. It might be a little obvious that I'm not recording from home. If you've seen any of the things I've done recorded from home before, this actually is my cottage. I'm recording it while I'm still up at the cottage on August the 2nd. When this will be posted, I will also be at Highview Community Church to preach and teach live, but I thought I would just share a little bit of my cottage space with you. Don't know if you'll hear some birds in the background or maybe a boat going by. I don't know, but that's where I thought I would just record this for this morning. I'd like to begin with a prayer, if that's okay. And I've written out prayer sort of as a way for us to just kind of prepare our hearts and get ready for the teaching, sort of a liturgy, if you will. And if you would just join me now in prayer. Yahweh, Lord, Adonai, God, most God, you are God and we are not. We worship you as the divine other, so much other than us, we can hardly believe you take notice. And yet, we are the object of all you can offer. Who can understand this? We seek your wisdom this morning. Our plans are in your hands. Our motives do not escape your notice, and please allow our humility to showcase your ability among us. So we come now to your word open before us, and humbly we ask you to open our eyes, open our ears. Teach us this morning. We're all yours. Amen. You are God, and I am not. This is the breath prayer that I have learned over many years to wake up to. It's what I try to bring to my mind in my first waking moments as much as I possibly can. It's not easy. A lot of times, a lot of other things crowd in, but as soon as I can have the concentration, this is the prayer that comes to mind. It's a discipline. It didn't come easy at first, and sometimes it's still not. I learned this discipline many years ago from a teaching on the name of God and the ultimate name for God, Yahweh, which has this idea of God most God, ultimate authority, and the idea that between us, between God and humanity, is this fundamental distinction. You are God, and I am not. And I'm reminded of this because this morning we find ourselves smack in the middle of the book of Proverbs, specifically chapter 16. A chapter that has some unique and distinctive features even in a book that is so wonderfully repetitive. Proverbs 16, I'd encourage you to turn there in your own Bibles now. Proverbs 16, right smack in the middle of this rather repetitive book. Have you noticed that? As we've studied our way through the summer, or maybe just even in your own reading, Proverbs doesn't really collect all the topics it wants to talk about together in one space when it's talking about the overall topic of wisdom. There are a few places where the verses string together to form one main thought, but mostly we're looking at couplets, two lines that by comparison or increasing emphasis or a better than kind of structure, they provide for us instruction in the way God wants us to live wisely. Proverbs 16 is the middle of the book. And then verse 16 of chapter 16 is the middle of the chapter, so it becomes a pivot point. And here's an interesting little bit of info that helps us in our study of Scripture. Something that the ancient writers did frequently enough that the original readers would have caught it, we might not. Often ancient writers would kind of anchor their main point right in the middle of their work. And what they're doing is more or less building up to this space and then resolving it as they go. They tell their story all around it. It's more a feature in the wisdom books than others, but still. So here in Proverbs 16:16, we have the main point, the thesis statement of this collection of work. And Eric preached this main point for us on July 19. Let me read it for us. Proverbs 16:16. How much better to get wisdom than gold, to get insight rather than silver. Get wisdom, pursue wisdom, seek after wisdom, sort of with this urgency and enthusiasm that might be said something like, I gotta get me some of that. Better than gold, this stuff. So here we are in chapter 16 in the middle of the book. And there's this really cool feature in the first 9 verses. You might not notice it if you don't see it on the page in front of you, but the first 9 verses, in those first 9 verses, the Hebrew name for God, most God, Yahweh, you are God and I am not. It's used 8 times. Little Bible study note here. Number 1, in our English Bibles, when the Hebrew name Yahweh is rendered in Hebrew, we write it in our English translations as Lord in all capitals. Little Bible study note number 2. When anything is repeated in a condensed section like this, it's significant. The author is telling us something. And in an oral tradition, when the scriptures would be read out loud to the congregation, this repetition of the name Yahweh, Lord, or they would have heard Adonai, would be a noticeable feature and would be a message all unto its own. So let me read this out loud right now, and I'm going to do a little emphasis thing so we can get a taste of that, okay? Proverbs 16, 1-9. To humans belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue. All a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. The Lord works out everything to its proper end, even the wicked for a day of disaster. The Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. Through love and faithfulness, sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, evil is avoided. When the Lord takes pleasure in anyone's way, he causes their enemies to make peace with them. Better a little with righteousness than much gained with injustice. Verse 8 is the only one that doesn't use the name Yahweh. Verse 9, in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Lord, Adonai, Yahweh, you are God, and I am not. And if that is so, and that's a pretty strong statement all by itself of how humans are to respond to God. How wise humans choose to respond to God. Proverbs 16 has a lot to say about this. About making plans, about checking motives, about fostering humility, about how we as humans who are not God should respond to God who is God. Now, we didn't read all of chapter 16, and not every verse in chapter 16 kind of neatly tuck into any linear format as much as, I don't know, my Western mind, our Western minds like to do that. Proverbs isn't structured around that, and we shouldn't try to force it to be something that it isn't. The chapter also speaks to issues like justice and leadership and the ways we speak to one another. Even the glory of gray hair, which I don't know, is kind of a favorite verse for me at this stage of my life, and this whole idea of dispelling the stigma of age, never mind all that. But overall, this idea of God being God and our wise responses to making plans, checking our motives, fostering humility, these are woven deeply into this chapter. And I'm wondering if, as we explore these verses for just a little bit over the next few minutes, we're not going to find even more of a significance for us smack in the middle of the summer of 2020. Proverbs 16 is right in the middle of Proverbs. August 2nd is basically right in the middle of the summer, and the summer is right in the middle of the year, and this year, you are God and I am not. So how do I wisely respond to such a God in the midst of a year so very different than any of us have ever experienced? I don't know about you, but I can use all the wisdom I can get. So let's see what Proverbs 16 has for us. How wise humans respond to God. First response. My plans are in your hands. My plans are in your hands. Now, speaking of hands, if we could do a show of hands to anyone who's had to adjust or change any kind of plans that you would normally have over the summer due to COVID-19, maybe even other extenuating circumstances, but specifically COVID-19 has changed your summer somehow. Any camping plans or family gatherings or travel plans. I mean, pretty much all of us are having a very different kind of summer than we expected. In fact, this entire year has been basically impossible to make any sure plans at all. Every week as the lockdown tightened, and then maybe even more challenging as restrictions were lifted, and every week there's like a new set of rules and a new group of folks we can be with. Planning birthday parties or graduations or weddings for that matter, trying to plan out a summer when COVID-19 keeps making things different every week. For Ken and I, it certainly has been a different kind of summer so far. No services at the church that we attend here at the cottage just down the channel, Cognition Community Church, all canceled. Just June being a kind of back and forth sort of thing. Instead of what we usually do is arrive and just sort of stay put, certainly me. July didn't even come into focus until the very end of June. Nothing like the very well orchestrated plans that we usually have on our calendar to mark our cottage time with our family. We did know, of course, that we'd back in town for the wedding of Laura Intoff and Will Lauren last week. Congratulations to them, by the way. Kudos for their tenacity and grace and devotion to one another, and to their families for how they navigated the planning for that day. It wasn't easy, and if any of you have had to be involved in weddings or other big things like that, you know. Even this morning, for me as a speaker today, I mean, I'm recording this right now, but when you're scheduled to preach anywhere right now, you really have no idea what's going to be in person or by video. Turns out a little bit of both. And a lot of people have to keep adjusting the plans to make it work. Adjusting plans. And what about Thailand? If you don't know, I'm missionary in residence here at Highview, and usually I'm in Thailand a lot. But I don't know right now when I can go back. I had thought at one point that I would go in October, but And then the next is a possibility for January 2021, which will be a whole year and a very long period of time between my visits. But actually, that's even really hard to tell right now. Things could change. We just don't know. And personally, for me, the way I'm wired, it's really odd when one of the things you bring to the table is this ability for long range planning, but you can't. You just can't. To humans belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue, or an accurate announcement of what's really going to happen. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans. Proverbs 16:2. This isn't a superstitious thing, by the way. As if we just go ahead and make our own plans and then have some kind of prayer or a little ceremony or something, as if we're just kind of now committing it to the Lord and He's supposed to sign off on our plans. But verse 2 is more of an acknowledgement of what's stated in verse 9. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. It all seems to be about acknowledging God's bigger ideas for our lives, God's bigger story, a bigger story than we as humans can plan out for ourselves. You are God and I am not, so my plans are in your hands. Now, it's not like we're just supposed to wing it. I mean, there's enough in other parts of the Bible about the wisdom of counting the cost and thinking things through. We can make our plans. But the truth is that God's got bigger ideas for our lives that we can see at any given moment. And when things change, like when a global pandemic changes our plans for a very long time, it seems, there's wisdom in taking our hands off and letting God be in charge. You are God and I am not means you are in charge and I am not. My plans are in your hands. How do wise humans respond to God? First response, my plans are in your hands. Second response, my motives won't escape your notice. There's a shoal in front of our cottage. You know what a shoal is, right? Kind of this high point of rock under the water. This is our dock, and out in front of our dock, there's a shoal. Can you see it? Neither can I. But here's a picture of our shoal, almost the same perspective in low water. Significant difference. In fact, at one point, at the lowest point of the water, when the water was the lowest, we joked sometimes about building a bunkie out there. But the water has risen so much this year and in a few years coming up to it, but this year is so high, you can't even see it. At the beginning of our cottage stay, I was given the job of marking our shoal. This is something that cottagers do. It warns other boaters, right? Simple job, right? But I went out twice in the kayak with a white, empty, sealed jug tied to a rope, tied to some rocks to anchor it. I couldn't find it. I'm out in the kayak right over top where I think the shoal should be, and I can't see it. I've been coming up to this cottage for 47 years. I know where this thing is. But when I'm out there, I cannot see it at all. I could sort of see it from the deck. If the water was flat and the sun was shining just at the right angle, like an elusive Loch Ness, long and sleek, just lurking there under the shadows. Not unlike motives. Okay, here I'll just speak for myself. Sometimes my motives are clear, obvious, perhaps even outright stated. like way above the water. Obvious to me, obvious to everyone else. But often enough, my motives can lurk just out of sight under the surface of the water. All a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. Whoever winks with their eye is plotting perversity. Whoever purses their lips is bent on evil. And of course, they're talking about cultural facial expressions of the ancient Near East that even might be used today that indicate someone's got something up their sleeve, perhaps an impure motive. But whether we're obvious in our facial expressions or not, my motives won't escape God's notice. You are God and we are not. And well, we just can't pull one over on God. He knows. Like even maybe when we don't even realize it for ourselves. Like the shoal. The motives are there, just not always obvious to us. Especially perhaps when we're under a long period of stress like we've been. I mean, the more reason I think to keep doing a personal check. Decisions are harder to make. Not just because of the challenges in planning, but because we can tend to react more out of fear and anxiety than wisdom. During times like this, I think it's so wise to keep doing a personal check to see what's under the surface. Psalmist helps us with this. Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. It's a crazy, dangerous prayer if you think about it. But so is running aground on a hidden shoal. Our wisest response as humans to God, most God, is to recognize that our motives don't escape His notice. How wise humans respond to God. First response, my plans are in your hands. Second response, my motives won't escape your notice. Third response, my humility will showcase your ability. I don't think it's a surprise to anyone who knows me that I don't consider myself an especially good cook. I get by. I raised a family. Ken was always self-sufficient in the kitchen even long before we were married. So we're fine, but I'm not a good cook. And I think some of it, at least, is a temperamental thing. I just don't have the patience for it. I mean, so much of food preparation is like turning something on and waiting for it to boil, or standing there stirring something on the stove, just waiting for it to get to the right consistency. And what I try to do is to fit something else in between. I'm easily bored in the kitchen, so I'm never actually paying full attention to what I'm doing. This drives Ken crazy. He has way more patience for food prep than I do, and he knows that I get myself all distracted with just getting a few dishes done or chopping up something for another part of the meal, and he's always checking on me, lifting up lids to see if something's boiling, turning down the element if he thinks he needs it, helping when I haven't even asked, and that drives me crazy. Some of the stupidest arguments we've ever had have happened in the kitchen over this. And it happened this summer on the first day that the kids were up with us. Ken and Zachary were working down on the dock, and I was putting together a meal. But in between getting that all ready, I just thought I'd get the cookie dough ready to bake the cookies the next day. And the whole time I was working around a 6 o'clock time, ready time, arbitrary. We're at the cottage. We don't have to go anywhere. But I had said that supper would be around 6 o'clock. That's when I told everybody. And this whole time, I was hoping Ken wouldn't finish at the dock and come into the kitchen and start fixing everything. The cookie dough ended up, though, taking a little longer than I expected. And sure enough, Ken and Zachary are finished on the dock, and up he comes, and he starts making no end of suggestions as to what should be done about dinner. It wasn't a fight per se. The kids were with us, after all, but we did banter just a bit. And afterwards, when Abby and I were doing the dishes, it was girls' turn. There's a boys' day and a girls' day for dishes. It was girls' day. So afterwards, I start to explain this dynamic between her grandfather and I, very playfully, very respectfully, and fully within Ken's hearing. He comes in to help me, and I don't want his help. And I thought she'd be all on my side, like girl power, stay together. Wow, yeah, that must be very annoying. But what she said, very playfully, very respectfully, was, "So, Grandma, you working on that humility thing these days?" And a few things came to mind in that moment. One was, how cheeky. Another was that this was actually a perfect definition of the pride-humility dynamic of Scripture. And another thought was, perfect. I can use this to illustrate that part of the sermon I'm preaching for August 2nd, which I do with permission because Abby actually nailed it. You see, pride is thinking and behaving as if you don't need help. And scripturally, pride is thinking and behaving as if you don't need God's help. Proverbs 16 verse 5 gives a word of warning. The Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. Some harsh words that we shy away from or try to explain away to our own peril. God has some big feelings apparently when it comes to pride. And if we jump ahead a little, which we can do in Proverbs because of its structure, we can see again God's attitude towards pride. Better to be lowly in spirit along with the oppressed than to share plunder with the proud. Given the choice between being oppressed but humble and having all the spoils of war but being proud, choose poverty, choose oppression. Pride is that detestable. God takes this very seriously. Verse 18 is probably the most quoted verse in the Bible on pride. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Now, I used to think that this was describing some sort of curse formula and misinterpreting the word pride as feeling good about yourself and thinking that if you're walking along the sidewalk and you start feeling good for yourself, then you're going to trip, fall flat on your face. Not so much. I mean, first of all, pride is this thinking you can do something without God. And then it's more of a cause and effect deal, kind of a no-brainer, actually. Because if you're not asking for help from others, you're very likely not even really asking for help from God. And then, well, life just isn't doable. It's not sustainable. You burn out, crash, break down because we all need help. But it's more than that, really. Because when we are full of the pride that thinks we can do this, we don't allow God the space to be spectacular. My humility showcases God's ability in that an ordinary life can become extraordinary. And I wonder if this isn't why God isn't so upset with pride. It's so restrictive, so diminishing. If we're running around doing things in our own strength, not letting anybody, including God, help us, then where's the power of God in all that? Humility, admitting and operating as if we don't have all the answers, don't have all the energy, don't have all the smarts or the connections or the solutions, but instead we desperately, absolutely, completely need God and His power and presence in our lives. That's what brings any greatness to the kingdom. That's what brings wisdom. You are God, and I am not, and I need you. Yahweh, in whom I live and breathe and have my being, I'm lost without you. I'm nothing without you. Yahweh, Adonai, Lord, you are God, and I am not. My plans are in your hands, so lead me, write your bigger story in my life. Take me where I need to be to do your work and your will. My motives don't escape your notice, so examine me, correct me, reveal to me any hidden thing that might do damage in any way. My humility can showcase your ability, so humble me. Let me be small, so you can be gigantically enormous in my life. A very wise man once pointed out to me that most of us want wisdom. We just don't want the difficult challenges that actually grow wisdom in us. We have that chance right now. 2020 has been dubbed this terrible year. But what if it wasn't? What if 2020 was the year we all became just a little bit wiser? Thanks for sharing this time, my cottage space. I hope you're encouraged. Let's all grow wiser together this year.